All right, I am going to call to order the November 6, 2024 City of Port Washington Common Council meeting. I, Dan Benning, am filling in as council president for our mayor who is out of the town. I will be acting as an alder when it comes to voting. And then all alders are here, other than Alderman Newmeyer, who should be arriving around 7 o'clock. So with that, if you'd rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The consent agenda, approving minutes from previous meetings.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or feedback?
One question.
Yep.
The October 1st council meeting minutes weren't in there. I mean, are they not done? I'm just curious.
And Susan is not here tonight, so I think we'll have to defer that question and find out from her.
The
Yeah.
first meeting of the month. I will ask her.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Put
for
your
the
mic
minutes.
on.
I'll follow up with Susan and get back with you, and then we'll just put it on for the November 19th meeting for approval. And you said the first meeting of October? Okay,
Thank you.
I'll follow up on that.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Mayor's business. I just want to share my gratitude for all the folks that helped out with our election yesterday. I don't have the numbers from Susan, but I think we were close to 100% of eligible voters that voted. I know that the ward I was helping out with, we had lines and we had a lot of people, and a lot of people came and did their civic duty and voted. So I want to thank all those folks that helped support that. It was a long night for a lot of them in the various locations. And Susan is not here tonight because she and the team spent a long day today as well, doing the wrap up that the things they need to do to ensure that we do have the integrity in our election process. And I will firmly believe that we are there with that one. So I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for some of those here on council that were involved with that election as well. City Administrator does not have anything for tonight, so we'll skip down to public comments and appearances. This is your chance to share. You've got 3 minutes to share about one of the topics on the council agenda tonight. If you step to the podium, we'll give you 3 minutes. If you need longer, let us know and we'll schedule that. And if you share your name and address, Mr. Larson.
Good evening. David Larson, 223 Grandview Drive here in Port. I'm not speaking anything on the agenda tonight. I hope that's still okay, and I understand that you can't comment, so if I ask a question, it is rhetorical. I'm here to speak to the excessive taxing that I see going on here in Port Washington. Specifically, the new safety building that is under consideration. So in the interest of full disclosure, I am a former alderman. I served here for 10 years, from 2008 to 2018, in Alderman Tierney's spot, but I'm now in Alderman Pleitner's district. And I was on the finance committee for all 10 of those years, and I chaired that committee, I think, for 7 of them. And I currently am a Ozaukee County supervisor. And I've been following this story fairly closely, and I have a whole timeline here that I wanted to get through, but when I was at home practicing, it took me about 10 minutes to get through it, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But I do want to say that $35 million is an excessive amount of money. And when I was on the council, we were talking about a satellite fire station on the west side of the railroad tracks, because the argument back then was, well, if there's a fire on the west side of town and there's a train, we have to go down to Sunset to get and serve the west side. I didn't much believe in that argument, and it turns out I was right, because now you want to build a fire station on the west side of the railroad tracks and sell the buildings on the east side and not have service on the east side. So you're going to have the same problem getting to probably the more critical area. If downtown catches on fire, you want to get there as quickly as possible. And if you have to go down to Sunset and get there, you've got the same problem. So I don't understand what happened to that argument. And when we were looking at the satellite station, and don't quote me on the numbers, but I think the numbers we're looking at for that was like in a $10 to $12 million range. And that was a deal killer for us, because when we looked at it, we said that's too much of a tax burden to put on the people of Port Washington. So we said no. So if $10 to $12 million was too much 10 years ago, $35 million is certainly too much now, especially with everything else that's going on. Inflation through the roof, the water rates continue to go up. You've got your the EMS referendum that went through, which apparently wasn't enough money, I'm reading now, and there's an additional $80,000 for workers' comp that I don't think we knew about when that campaign was going on. So you're piling on, and I don't understand why this is such a rush. We have buildings. I know they're not the best buildings in the world, but Alderman Sigwart brought up a great point. If we need more room at the police station, why don't we add on? I think there's other options that we can look at. I think we're ramming this thing through too quickly. We haven't looked at any other proposals, at least not that I heard of, and maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen any other proposals, any other options, can we fix up the buildings that we have? Is there anything we do to avoid a $35 million building?
And we need to wrap up now, thanks.
Thank you. I will, I'll be back on the 19th.
Okay. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? And any other public comment? Okay, thank you. 7A1, the consideration and possible action on Resolution 2024-9, resolution authorizing the issuance and establishing parameters for the sale of $8 million general obligation promissory notes. Mark?
Thank you. This item earlier tonight went to the Finance Committee with a recommendation for approval. It is the last component of our proposed 2024 borrowing. It is a fairly standard item, and I would encourage adoption.
Questions for Mark from council?
I would move to approve staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. All right. We will now open a public hearing to amend the zoning code and ordinance of the city of Port Washington relating to building height limitations for certain parcels of land in the downtown area of the B4 Central Business District. And we'll invite those in favor to come to the podium. Those in favor. And those in favor. Those opposed?
Good evening. My name is Gertjan Vandenbroek, 506 North Power Street, Port Washington. Bob, are you able to pull up the map?
Eric, if we'll just do the air media.
I'm going to nuance that a little bit. There's a sort of a gray area between in favor and not in favor, and that is in favor but for improvement, and that's the category I fall in. I'd like to just start off by sincerely complimenting the council and city leadership on all the hard work you've done thus far. You've set out a very clear strategic vision. You've hired and enabled the professionals to put the processes in place that we need to support those strategic visions. And from a resident perspective, you've done a phenomenal job increasing and improving engagement in the community and communication with the community so that people like myself are aware of what's going on in the city. So those are all very positive developments. And the comments that I want to make related to the proposed ordinance are simply in that spirit of improvement. How can we take what I think is a good first draft, a good first step, and are there opportunities to improve on this draft ordinance? So I've shared a couple of broad philosophies with everybody, with most of you. What I want to touch on this evening is just 3 or 4 very specific examples to highlight the concerns. So the first I would like to point to, and this is not going to work on all the screens or audience, that is this pink or magenta screen that is on the site that's currently the Family Promise site. That is a gateway parcel to downtown. It defines our downtown, and with the ordinance as written, it would be our tallest building in that location. That is something I personally don't think is in character with the other buildings that are around there, specifically on the south side of Grand Avenue. So I don't think the height proposed on that parcel is in character with our downtown. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the Plan Committee and this council objected to a proposal that was put forward by Schaefer Development that had a significantly sized building on that parcel, and it was rejected because the scale was felt not to be in keeping with Port Washington. So with existing ordinance today, we had the ability to say no. With the proposed ordinance, we don't. It becomes a right, and the developer has the right to propose what we rejected in the past. So that's my first specific example with the proposed ordinance. The second example involves the same ordinance. Personally, I think that site probably calls for a blue zone at the street level. But one of the things that the ordinance does not do is distinguish between the street-adjacent facade and what happens behind that. So in a site like this, with the Ozarki County building behind it, which is a fairly large building, that site can support a larger building back from the street, not right on the street. So to me, an opportunity here could be, how do we put say a blue or a green zone at street level, and a blue zone at street level and a green zone step back from that. So we have this tiered effect, which we're clearly looking for now in our ordinance, except we have this tiered effect not from city block to city block, but we have this tiered effect within a city block. And if you take that same concept to the 2 city blocks that are west of North Franklin Street, if we take the 2 parcels that are west of Franklin Street, north of the Burner Building, and south of, say, the pasta shop. If we had a huge fire or some other calamity in Port Washington, in those city blocks, which are today 35-foot buildings, and except for the corner building of Studio 321, with the ordinance as written, somebody would be able to build back a 4-story building, a green zone building on Franklin Street. And personally, I think that is out of character with the Franklin Street corridor. But there again, you could think of an ordinance that has a blue zone at the street facade. It fits in with a character. That immediately behind it, you could have the green zone because it would be pushed back from the street. It wouldn't impact people's experience of walking up and down Franklin Street, and the things that we and our visitors enjoy today. So to me, another opportunity that's not addressed in the ordinance, and I'm not an expert enough on what Graves' process is to know whether it will be addressed there, but there's an opportunity for us to limit the scale at the city, at the streetscape, without limiting the heights of buildings we can do away from the street. The third example I'd like to touch on is the proposed heights, the 38 feet, 48 feet, or the 52 feet. As a community, we've said that our main strategic focus in our downtown visioning, which we did with Grafe as a community and which we approved in this council, the visioning that came out of that, one of the strategic directions that came out of that visioning process was that our next area of focus was going to be East Main Street. We as a community, if you speak to the Port Washington Main Street Association, we as a community need commercial retail. Our businesses cannot expand, we cannot bring new businesses to town, so we need commercial retail. And as a community, we said we want that commercial retail to happen along East Main Street. So we've identified a need, we've set a strategy, and we said this is where we want to focus on. But if we take a green zone building of 48 feet on Main Street, you run into a couple of issues with 48 feet. One issue you run into is a premier retail commercial space, floor to ceiling, wants to be about 14 feet. Go and look at Duluth, go and look at Sherpers, go and look at Port Washington State Bank, go and look at Charbonneau's, go and look at Duluth, go and look at Daily Baking Company, go look at many other developments that are coming up. They want to be about 14 feet. The space between the commercial and the residential wants to be about 2 feet. So now on the first floor, you're looking at about 16 feet floor to floor. A 48-foot building it's a very typical 4-story building in what I would call anywhere in America. You take 48 feet, you take off 4 feet for the elevator overrun, you take off 4 feet for the mechanicals that sit on the roof, and you have a 44-foot building, you divide it by 4, you get 4 levels of 11 feet each. If we're identifying a need on the first floor of 16 feet and we've designed for 11, we're short 5 feet. So that's one potential area of concern. The other area of concern is if you walk along Main Street from east to west, you'll see that there is a pretty dramatic slope, which is a strength of Port Washington as we slope to our 7 hills from the lake. But what it also does on the Main Street parcels, so on our strategic focus, is you lose about 2 to 3 feet of allowable building height because you have to compensate for the slope. So now you're shy 7 to 8 feet for a good building on those locations. Now you could say, well, let's make that up in the residential floors. But building in downtown Port Washington is not inexpensive. You have the lake to deal with, you have the clay to deal with, you have material expectations to deal with, you have parking requirements to deal with. Building in downtown Port Washington is not inexpensive. So to be able to pay for a quality building, which we deserve, you want to have premier residential amenities. And premier residential amenities are typically, so if we now try and cut those floors down to enable us to have a premier commercial building, that is not congruent with a premier residential product. You can't go and take several feet out of three residential levels to get a premier residential product. All right, so what does that leave us? Well, let's take off an entire floor of the building. Let's just go with a three-story building. And let me be clear, I'm not advocating for a 4-story building on Main Street. I'm a very big proponent of scale on the street adjacent zone, but taking the building's height back towards the rear. So if we wanted to do if we wanted to limit it to 3 stories on the rear section, so the core of the building, you're taking off one quarter of the tax base that we as a city could have by eliminating that floor. You're taking off the highest value floor because it's got the views. So we're losing that opportunity potentially. You're also taking the potential for the person who's building that building to pay for underground parking through a premier additional revenue from the fourth floor. So what we're going to get is we're either going to get a situation where we have suboptimal building designs, or we're going to have a situation where the developer says, you know what, I can't afford to have parking on the ground and premier commercial on first floor. I'm going to do the parking on first floor at street level. And that is an outcome that would not fit our vision for what Main Street could and should be. So that would be the concern I have with how the 48 feet was determined versus the realities of the slopes that we have in Port Washington versus the realities of a premier commercial need that we need downtown Port Washington versus a building that you could build anywhere else on a flat, smooth parcel of land. The other potential heights, it's not really a concern, but I would call it an opportunity, is if you look at the green parcels west of Wisconsin Street. So between Wisconsin and Milwaukee, there's a couple of parcels identified as green parcels. Shortly, depending on which way the discussion goes with the police and fire department, they may or may not be parcels that should have color where the police and fire department are today. So we might want to think about defining what those color zones should be today. But with those green zones, again, I'm not an advocate for making them pink zones. I'm not an advocate for making them even higher. But I always thought that Haag-Muller and the Anze Group had a very creative solution for what they did with those Lake Harbor townhomes by having those little lofts on the roof. They don't span the entire width of the building. That project was very successful. It was very popular because you have these little lofts. And the little loft allowed those occupants to look over the buildings adjacent to them and have this tiered effect again that we're looking for, I think, in downtown. So maybe a suggestion is west of Wisconsin Street becomes a green plus zone, where the plus becomes, okay, in that area, we will allow these rooftop lofts, provided they don't expand the entire width of the building, so that people from the 7 hills around the buildings can still have views of the lake. And the people in those lofts can have views over the other properties east of them, between them and Lake Michigan. I think as a community, that just increases the accessibility to views of the lake. It increases our revenue and our tax base, and it won't detract from the experience at street level, and it won't detract from the experience from the 7 hills around those buildings. The fourth example I just wanted to touch on was the idea behind screening the mechanicals on the roof. I think we can all agree that the intent is the right intent. The intent is to make something that is potentially unsightly not visible from the street, and I think that's the right intent. My argument would be that the solution to address the intent is maybe an unintended consequence. I'm not an HVAC expert, so I called an HVAC person last week to ask them about some of my concerns. The concerns that I would have is, how do you allow a maintenance worker to safely work on those mechanical units if there's a screen around them? The answer is the screen has to be away from the mechanical units to allow space to circulate around. So now you've taken a 4x4 AC condenser and you've made it 12 by 12. Then, so that would be one concern. The second concern is if you're talking about restaurants, they need makeup air units, which means free uninhibited flow into the building, but they also need to get rid of the ventilation from the hoods, so free uninhibited exhausting of the airflow. If you're going to put screens around that, either those units have to be significantly larger to be able to generate the same amount of airflow, or the screens have to be significantly larger to provide the free space for the airflow that's required for those units to function correctly. And if you start looking at all of those extra square footage that has to be added to the roof of a building to house these mechanicals so they're not visible from the street. I think the unintended consequences is we're going to make our rooftops from the Seven Hills a lot more unattractive than we are today, and we're not going to do any enhancement to the experience of the views from the street level. So I think I would think that the same correct intent, which is to make something that's unsightly, to hide it, can be achieved by setting the mechanicals back from the edges of the building, so that when you're walking along the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street and you're looking up at the building, you don't see those mechanical units. That's a pretty easy maths diagram to show site views that in the Plan Commission submittals that we can accomplish that. But screening, I think, it's a cost, and it's an unintended consequence that we may regret down the road. So once again, I think the proposed ordinance is a great first step, but I think it's ready for improvement. I don't personally think it's ready for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Gretchen. Go ahead.
I'm Don Cosentine, 518 Brentwood Court. And I would like to comment on air conditioners and stuff on top of buildings. That's a problem maybe down the road or something. But I would like to comment that we're looking for commercial development downtown, probably to pay for new fire engines, additions to the school. Our population hasn't grown that fast. We keep putting more money in borrowing for schools. And at a point, we ought to just stop and think what we want for downtown Port Washington. We talk about commercial spaces and stuff. Do we want a big commercial district downtown? First off, we only have like 4 or 5 blocks. We're not like Sheboygan.
So Don, we're here specifically about building heights in the ordinance.
Okay, building heights, that's what I'm getting into. We can always weasel into those things. The guy can always say, make it a little higher than that. I think what's proposed here is very good. And I think we ought to just continue with it. But we have to remember that people want to develop this stuff. They're going to be pinching you all the time for something more and more. Let's pass these things and really keep to them. And somebody find a measuring tape, because it seems like these buildings are higher than the 35 feet or whatever is in there.
Okay, thanks, Don. Don, what was your address?
518 Brentwood Court.
Okay. Mr. Showalter.
Good evening. Steve Showalter, 520 South Tower Drive in Port. But I hang out more at 206 North Franklin Street, so. I'm in the camp, as Gertchen is, of it's a good first draft, but I don't think it's fully baked yet. And there are quite a few points he brought out as far as the ceiling heights and premium commercial space and what have you that I hadn't even really considered. And those are salient points and very valid. We own our company, and some of us personally in the family own probably, when you look at I'm dealing with the light blue on the screen here, the 38-foot building heights. If you factor out the city-owned property there, which I hope we're not selling any more city parking lots going forward, but and you factor out the properties in that light blue that have already been developed and won't be redeveloped, we're not going to see something in our lifetime new on the Newport Shores site than what's there, I can't imagine. And the Lighthouse condominiums and, of course, Inventors, you factor out those already developed parcels, my related interests, probably own 50 to 70% of the remaining land that's affected in this zoning district. You know, the 38-foot height proposed is in and of itself not a terrible thing, but again, thinking about some of what Gertchen has brought out, it is a very limiting factor, especially when you're adding in the HVAC components on the rooftop. And again, restaurants do require a greater amount of, we've got 2 restaurant operations in our shopping center building. And I'll say right now, the shopping center building is likely not the eventual highest and best use of that property. It's developable for something else, whether it's going to be by us or being offered. What bothers me, I guess, a little bit is the elimination of any discussion of some design element changes or something that might, even a portion of a building that might architecturally add and enhance to the aura of the downtown, maybe of, let's say that shopping center building was reimagined and it had a turret or just a small area on part of it that exceeded by 8-10 feet this limit. We can't talk about that, but maybe visually and aesthetically, it's something that really would be a benefit. You know, this limits that. I'm all for screening the HVAC and the venting and what have you, but we ran into a problem like that when we built our Grafton property. We have a restaurant in there, Flipside. Many of you probably been there. We were required to build dormers around the ductwork, or the exhaust fans for the restaurant, and everything just exponentially had to be made bigger and larger and what have you. Yeah, aesthetically, there that worked out, but to put that kind of, to add in those HVAC units or whatever it is, rooftop, the servicing aspect of it, as both Don and Gertchen have said, are certainly an element. To try and incorporate those within a building to hide them so that you can at least get a building height where you have enough floors and enough occupancy to make it viable, it is difficult. You can't house those units commercially inside of a building. So, you know, that bothers me a bit, but the amount of property that we own in this situation, I would have felt we would have been perhaps consulted a little bit more on this. It seems to have, I've read the ordinance and read the justifications that it's been vetted by the Plan Commission multiple times. Not everybody's following Plan Commission minutes or meetings and stopping down and seeing what's going on. And I get a sense that Gertchen, who probably does that much more than anyone else, hasn't really been involved in this discussion, given his comments tonight, nor have we as a significant property owner affected here. It was mentioned certainly eloquently that the financial impact, the tax assessment impact on limiting these properties, or at least not having an ability to discuss, is significant. What effect on this significant property holding that we have in this district, what's the financial impact or developable negative now to us to have this sort of constraint and try and talk to a developer or move the property out? So I just do feel that it is a good start. The rooftop units in that to be included, that should be a point of further discussion. I don't think that should be included in this. And I certainly think that there should be an ability to have some discussion for architectural elements and things that might exceed the 38 feet. Again, the 38 feet, if it doesn't include HVAC units in that, but has still some ability for some sort of a component. I've heard somebody say even the flagpole on the Wilson House, which is a lonely flagpole without a flag on it, I get it, could be counted as a height situation for this ordinance because it's so strictly written. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous to be that constrained. So I will say Bob Harris did give us a heads up 2 weeks ago or so that there's an ordinance coming out that maybe we might like to take a look at. So kudos to you, but that's the only contact I've had or our company's had or anybody in the family, given our holdings here, about this and the potential impact or feedback. So that's why I'm making what's for me a rare appearance here, just to give you my observations on it. So I would strongly suggest that maybe this be deferred and maybe hashed out a little bit with some of the significant stakeholders in the districts that are involved. So, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any others? Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing and move into the next item. Ordinance 2024-10, amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Port Washington relating to building height limitations for certain parcels of land in the downtown area of the B4 Central Business District and amending the official zoning map. This is the second reading. Bob?
Thanks, Alderman Benning. So just to introduce this ordinance with a bit of background. This started with the intent of looking at building heights at Plan Commission. It arose from both the Plan Commission and this body kind of approaching that 35-foot, anything over 35-foot special exception process as rather onerous, and just, I think generally it got to the point where it's just disliked. And I think that was the impetus for this ordinance. And so starting out at Plan Commission with these discussions, this ordinance, the intent and primary issues with this ordinance was really threefold. It was, yes, put some specific height limits down in the B4 ordinance, the downtown zoning district, and if not eliminate or at least drastically reduce having to go through that 35-foot public hearing, supermajority vote at a council level for anything over 35 feet, be it a flagpole, a AC unit, or an entire building story. The other intent of it was really just to look at height differences between east and west, going from the lake and then terracing upwards as we move to the west. And that explains why we got to we see these tiered heights. Because what currently, right now, before zoning is unlimited height, subject to a case-to-case review of 35 feet that we saw. So during the course of our discussions in '23, the Plan Commission did start looking at items like the step backs, rooftop additions, the decorative elements for corners, et cetera. But given that we have a rezoning coming up this coming year, and given that our zoning team will have urban designers and architects looking at a more vetted and detailed B4 zoning district, taking into account, what Gertchen and Mr. Showalter brought up tonight. The point was to focus on that original intent of the ordinance. Avoid the 35-foot process. Identify those terracing zones of different heights, and put in some type of initial maximum height limits, knowing that we were going to have a much more detailed and a little detailed ordinance I think everyone can rally around that takes into account aesthetics, architecture, and the terracing of this ordinance. And so this was brought to council in February just for feedback and direction to put together what Plan Commission recommended it into an ordinance format. And the expectation was we were going to come back in probably about a month later with the full ordinance. What we didn't anticipate was the length of time we were going to get from a title company that would have went into the text ordinance. And so here we are 6-7 months later with this ordinance, and now the zoning code isn't a year away as it was back in February, but we're looking at a matter of months. And so the idea that we will have this to put in place that was given the original intent, and waiting for that more detailed ordinance from Grafe and our consulting team and the city, and going through the full vetting process. Yeah, this ordinance is a first step, and looking at it now, and putting it in place, or deferring, or putting it in place knowing that we're going to have a really expansive ordinance in a few months. To me, it's a horse apiece, or as I put it, there's no wrong answer. And so I'm calling this, yes, it is a first step. And so hopefully that's kind of I gave you the kind of the background and the intent of it. And then I leave it to the council for any questions or comments.
Council, questions?
Dan?
Deb?
I think this is a really sound approach to help to preserve our downtown without unnecessarily preventing new development. However, there are so many questions here, and we have 2 members of the Plan Commission who are not present to hear your concerns. So I would like to make a motion to postpone this vote until November 19th, if the council approves.
I would second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? And I guess to be clear, are there questions that we can get to Bob that we want brought forward specifically before the 19th so we can review them? And I guess I would ask that we get those to Bob as soon as possible. And Bob, that you get those responses back to everybody.
Will do.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the motion? If not, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So we're deferred until the 19th. Thank you. And Bob, I'll ask you, I have a lot of questions around the process that was involved. I think we've gotten a lot of input in the last week or two from folks up here, from the community, the citizens. We've heard some tonight. I would want to make sure that, and I looked, the Plan Commission doesn't meet before our next council meeting, so you may want to pull them in on this to address some of these concerns, but I would have thought we would have got some of that feedback to the Plan Commission back last year even. So I'm a little concerned about just purely the process that was followed back then, because I personally, and I think the council relies on the Planning Commission to hash out these details with, our constituents here. So let's make sure we're tight on that one. All right, moving on to new business. We have a public hearing on the proposed creation and amendment of parts of Chapter 455, City Code relating to the creation, imposition, collection, and administration of a fire impact fee and a police impact fee to be imposed on developers to pay the proportionate shares of capital costs of constructing, expanding, or improving public facilities necessitated to accommodate new land developments with the city for which the said impact fee will be imposed. And Christy, I don't know if you're starting it or. Was this the public hearing? Yeah, okay, sorry, it's public hearing. So we'll ask for, thank you, Rob. I'm new at this. All right. Looking for those in favor of the impact fees. Those in favor. Those in favor. Those opposed to the impact fees. Any comments? Those opposed? Those opposed? With that, we'll close the public hearing. Now we'll move on. You got it, Rob? You got this one?
I'll kick it off, and Melissa
Okay.
might want to chime in.
All right, so we're moving on to ordinance 2024-11, establishing and imposing a fire impact fee and a police impact fee, and amending portions of Chapter 455 City Code impact fee, and this is a first reading.
Right, so at our October 1st meeting, the Common Council, Christy DeMaster was with us and went over the Public Facilities Needs Assessment and Impact Fee Study that was created by Trilogy Engineering, that was presented to the council, and the council accepted the report and moved to adopt the proposed impact fee via an ordinance amendment. So now we are here with the ordinance amendment. Again, it's a first reading. We published the we published notice of the public hearing, the required 10 days prior to this public hearing. And Christy has a brief presentation that's a little bit of a recap of her last presentation, but just to go through that in case there's anyone who needs a refresher on it, or certainly for the people watching at home. Okay.
Do you have that?
Yes, oh,
Okay.
yes, I do. No, yeah, sorry.
Thank you, and I will try to keep it brief since you heard all of this and had a pretty in-depth conversation at the October 1st meeting. But again, for anybody who wants a refresher or has not sat through the spiel before. So yes, what we're talking about is impact fees that would be charged to new development or to building expansions that create new expanded non-residential space. It would help defray a portion of the cost of the proposed new public works facility because that facility is really going to be sized to serve not only your existing population of businesses, but also new households, new industrial manufacturing, commercial development, and so on. So the intent with, I'll just keep talking. I'm going to go through the basic spiel stuff here. So the intent with impact fees, they can be used to pay for a variety of public community-wide facilities. So the intent there is to try to, over time, collect funds to pay for these larger community-wide facilities that serve more than one subdivision. So those would be in addition to your normal kind of roads and sewer and water requirements for subdivisions. The main thing with an impact fee study, if you want to move to the next one, is just making sure that you're not charging new development for things that are either replacement of existing facilities or really needed to upgrade your capacity to serve existing residents. And you also, they need to be spent with 8 years from when they're collected, so you have to have a solid plan in place for what you're going to build with them. So these are just a list of things in the statutes that you have to comply with, but that's kind of the intent there, is to make sure you're not double charging, overcharging, et cetera. With this proposed project, with a budget of $35 million for both police and fire facilities, based on projected growth in the future, the study identified about 19.8% of that cost could be eligible for recovery through impact fees charged to new development. And the remaining, roughly 80%, would have to be on the general levy. And these fees could be used to pay for project funding upfront or applied towards debt service as you go, which most likely will be where most of those dollars will get applied. What the ordinance is proposing, this shows what you have currently on your ordinance for fees. You charge a sewer connection fee, and then within the impact fee ordinance itself, there's a park development impact fee currently. We are proposing for single-family residential to add a fire impact fee of $2,461 per single family, and $2,003 per single family for the police portion of that. And a little bit later in the presentation, again, I'll show you kind of how that compares to other communities. And then recognizing that smaller dwelling units are going to typically have fewer people, we've sized those fees for smaller units based on some assumptions about persons per household, and this is consistent with the way that you currently do the park impact fee. And then there's also, these fees would also apply to non-residential development, which does generate demand for police and fire protection. Obviously, the ordinance proposes to do those on a per square foot basis. And that's where, so if you had completely new development, they would pay the fee. If you had a building that expanded onto it, then there would be some nominal fee depending on the size of that expansion. So it's really geared towards the size of the building that you're putting in place. And this is that, we talked about this quite a bit last time too, where you kind of compare to other communities in kind of the metro Milwaukee area. Right now, your fees are pretty low compared to other fast-growing communities. And one of the things I see is that the communities with a lot of growth tend to have higher impact fees because they're adding on new facilities to serve. Your police and fire impact fees will be a bit higher than most other communities because this is a brand new facility. A lot of the ones you'll see on this list built their police station or added on to a police station back in 2003 or 2005 or so on. So those costs are quite a bit lower then. And a lot of these communities have much more substantial fees for things like sewer and water facilities, and some pretty high park impact fees as well on this list. So the addition of these two fees would kind of put you more in the middle of the pack as far as that goes. And then just the adoption process, we talked about the study on October 1st. It's been available for review for 20 days as according to statutes. You held the public hearing, so then the next step would be to adopt the ordinance in front of you tonight to put these fees into effect. So I just want to run quickly through what the ordinance would accomplish on the next slide there. So it just adds a reference to the completed police and fire impact fee study. It adds a definition of accessory dwelling unit and makes it clear that impact fees would also apply to accessory dwelling units if the city adopts an ordinance to allow those. It puts the impact fees that were proposed into the study into the ordinance. There's a little bit of a change. You have an automatic increase of 3% per year in the fees each year. Just added a clause in there saying that you could set a lower increase by resolution. So a little more flexibility there. And then change the language regarding exemptions to include reference to non-residential building alterations. Since the park impact fee only applies to residential, that language was not in there. So we changed that so that if you have an expansion onto a non-residential building, you could charge the fees for that expansion. And then the last thing was a typo in the section regarding appeals. So that's what's all included in this ordinance for your consideration tonight.
Okay, and Rob, this is the first reading, and it'll come back on the 19th for second reading and vote at that point. Okay, any questions for Christie?
Really quick, that 19.8%, Christie, is that a statute? That's a statutory number that was determined?
It was determined in consistent with statutes. So the statute says you have to base your fees, base the proportionate share related to serving new development on an explicit service level standard. It doesn't say what that service level standard is. So I looked at building square feet per population served, as that's a pretty typically used standard for that.
And then once that, so $6.9 million were to be raised, then that impact fee will sunset, correct? Because it is just for this building.
Right, that's the idea. Whether that takes 20 years or 25, it'll depend on the pace of development.
Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Sigwart, you had a question?
The only question I have, Christie, really is that this is a pretty specific ordinance targeted towards the safety building as it's currently defined. Let's say that we build the fire station there in 2025 or 2026, okay? And we build the police station portion of it in 2028. Does this ordinance still hold true?
Well, there's kind of two parts to that, I think, right? There's nothing in here that says you have to build the facilities all at the same time. You've got 8 years to start spending the fees. So that's part one. But the second part is if you were to do something, a plan that was significantly different than this in terms of size or budget, then the study should be updated and the ordinance should be updated to reflect that.
But it could be passed now and then be updated.
It could be, yes. I guess if there's any question that you're thinking that it will be drastically, like, so let's say smaller, then
Well, yeah, we'd hope it
Yeah.
would be $20 million. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, I'm kidding. So I guess the question is, it can be revised at any time.
Yes.
Other questions for Rob or Christie? Okay, thank you, Christie. We'll
Thank you.
come back to this in 2 weeks. All right, next item is consideration and possible action on proposed amendment to offer to purchase, extending the time to negotiate developers agreement with Schaefer Development LLC and our city attorney.
Thank you, Alderman Benning. What you have before you in your packet is a proposed amendment to the offer to purchase between the City of Port Washington and Schaefer Development LLC to extend the time for the parties to negotiate and finalize and bring before you for your approval and ultimately execution a developer agreement regarding that subdivision project. Just as a quick recap, chronologically, the parties signed an offer to purchase it was executed on June 30th of this year, and that offer is still alive and well. It contemplates a closing date for this transaction of February 28th of next year, 2025. And between the time that the offer was signed on June 30th and the closing, which is contemplated in February of next year, the developer, Schaefer Development, has in 240 days, so just for ease of reference, 8 months from June 30th to satisfy itself as to certain contingencies and due diligence opportunities that this and other developers would have for a vacant parcel of land such as this. Many of those, I'm told, many of those inspection contingencies have been fulfilled. I can't speak to exactly where that's at, but I know a number of them have already been undertaken and completed by the developer. We originally amended the time period for the parties to arrive at a written developer agreement to November 7th, tomorrow. We have met with the developer and their representatives. We have exchanged email information. We've provided information at their request. More recently, last week, they hired an attorney, Attorney Mike Herbrand out of Grafton, whom I've known for a long, long time and is a very good attorney. I'm optimistic that with Mike's input, the negotiation of the developer agreement can accelerate. But back to the current matter before you, it is to consider and approve a further extension of time to get that developer agreement finalized until December 3rd. That isn't just too far away, and we'll use our best efforts to accomplish that. That's the status. I know that while the parties have met and exchanged information and negotiated in good faith, I think that more recently there was a revised plat for this subdivision that, when it was submitted, raised some questions about the degree to which the revised plat reflected the original concept plan that was approved. And so that has sort of created a ripple, if you will, that I think calls for further examination and, in turn, for a further extension of this timeline for a developer agreement. So I can assure you that the parties are actively engaged, and again, I'm optimistic that with some additional time, a developer agreement can be achieved.
Okay, any questions related to this? Okay, looking for a motion?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, any questions on the motion? If not, all in favor, say aye. Opposed? Thank you. Bear with me a second here. All right. It is time for any additional public comment or appearances. And again, 3 minutes, your time to share. Mr. Larson.
I forgot there was a second public comments. So maybe I won't be back on the 19th. I'll try to pick up where I left off. So for Alderman Newmeyer, who wasn't here when I first spoke, I'm here in opposition of the safety building. And I kind of want to talk about how the $35 million came into play. At $35 million, most of the people on this board were against that amount of money, or at least questioning it. And a lot of the question came up, made sense, and I really thought that this was on the path towards not happening. One of the quotes that I saw was from Alderman Tierney, who said that if there's people that are on the edge financially, this would push them over the edge, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. What I don't understand is how at $35 million it was a no-go, but at 33.5. Well, really 33.75, because you paid $250,000 to find 1.5 million in savings. So that's a 3.5% decrease. Somehow at only a 3.5% decrease, you went from no, I don't want to do this to yep, we can do this. The impact to the taxpayer is negligible at that point. So I don't understand how we went from actually some votes that happened that were split. There was a vote that went on where there was a no vote. And then this October 10th meeting happened, and on the 17th, unanimously, this thing passed. And I felt that as a taxpayer, I wasn't represented here. And I don't want to be preachy here, but as elected officials, you guys are here to represent the taxpayer. You don't represent the city. You don't represent department heads. You represent the taxpayer. And for myself and the social circles that I am in Port Washington, we all feel that we are not being properly represented at this time with this level of taxation. Again, I think there's opportunities to explore different routes to serve what needs to be served for the police and fire departments, and a $35 million is just not affordable to the taxpayers of Port Washington. Thank you, and maybe you'll see me on the 19th.
Thanks, Dave. Any other public comments, appearances? Okay. We will move on to a motion to convene in closed session per Wisconsin Statute 19.85 1C for the purpose of considering employment, promotion, compensation, and other terms and conditions of employment or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. Looking for a motion?
So moved.
Motion made and second. Ward 1? Aye. Ward 2? Aye. Ward 3?
Aye.
Ward 4? Aye. Ward 5? Aye. Ward 6? Aye. Ward 7? Aye. We are in closed session. We're meeting downstairs, correct? Okay. We'll be down there, I would say, give you 3 or 4 minutes, and let's wrap it up.